And Donald Trump has proven to be the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-Israel president in the history of the United States. And that's why evangelicals overwhelmingly have supported him. He won 81% of the vote in 2016, 80% in 2020, and I believe he's going to have a landslide victory in 2024.
Tell us why you support Donald Trump. Let's start with the basic premise of this. Why do you support Donald Trump?
Well, it's very simple. I support him because of his policies. He's certainly a friend of mine, has been for 9 years, but it's not about friendship. It's about policies. And, you know, people want to accuse evangelicals of being hypocritical because of Donald Trump's past. Well, we all have a past of some kind. But the fact is, we're not voting for a pastor or Sunday school teacher. We're voting for a president. And Donald Trump has proven to be the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-Israel president in the history of the United States. And that's why evangelicals overwhelmingly have supported him. He won 81% of the vote in 2016, 80% in 2020, and I believe he's going to have a landslide victory in 2024.
Does morality matter, though? Because part of being a person of faith, particularly the Christian faith, is there's a set of rules, a set of sense of what is right and wrong, which by any version of events Donald Trump has contravened. Does that not concern you at all?
Well, of course, some would argue, you know, President Biden has been accused of rape before. He's been accused of adultery. I'm not sure who's the most moral or less moral, but that's not what the issue is here. You know,
Donald Trump has been more than accused. I'm just on that point. Donald Trump has been found in a court to have sexually assaulted someone. He's been found in a court to have committed fraud. He's been found in a court to have committed adultery. And some people would say to you, Robert, well, you're a man of morals. You're a man of the church. That is not compatible with someone like you endorsing a man like Donald Trump.
Well, I would go back to my second vote I ever cast was in 1980. My first vote I cast for president was when I was a teenager, and I voted for Jimmy Carter. He was a Southern Baptist like I am. He was a Sunday school teacher. He had been married faithfully to one woman, and I thought he would be a great president. I voted for him. He turned out to be a lousy president. In 1980, he ran against a man named Ronald Reagan, who was a known womanizer when he was in Hollywood. He was divorced. He supported one of the most liberal abortion bills in California. He was the first divorced person to be elected president. The reason I voted for Ronald Reagan was not because I supported divorce. It's because I supported his policies. Jimmy Carter may have been a better Christian. Ronald Reagan was a better president.
And you're happy to have that distinction, because some people will say to you, Robert, that if you don't have a moral core, if you don't have an ability to tell right from wrong, you cannot be a good presidency, because politics is going to matter, has to mean something.
It comes down to a binary choice. And I believe, you know, many people would say somebody like Joe Biden, who supports the murder of babies inside the womb, he's lacking a moral compass as well.
What do you make of what happened with Trump and that attempted assassination? We've had people on our program talking, and I know that a lot of people in the Republican convention have talked about this notion of divine intervention, so that some sort of a supernatural force stopping that bullet from hitting Trump. How far along the line do you go on that?
Well, I talked quite a bit about that last night on Fox News here in the United States, and I believe it was divine intervention. Look, I believe God has a purpose for Donald Trump, just as he has a purpose for your life and my life. The Bible says in Psalm 139 that all of our days are written in God's book before we live one of them. He writes down the day of our birth, the day of our death, and everything that occurs in between those two events. So I don't think it's preposterous to say that God has a plan for Donald Trump. He does have a plan. Daniel chapter 2 in the Old Testament says God is the one who establishes rulers and removes rulers. Romans 13 says there's no government that exists that has not been established by God. So I don't think it's an outlandish thing to say that God had a plan for Donald Trump, just as he has a plan for all of us. And I think the only people who choke on that idea and think it's outlandish are people who really don't know the God of the Bible.
Yeah, or people who don't have faith. I think that's probably true. That would also mean that God had a plan for Biden to beat Trump 4 years ago.
Can I tell you an interesting story about that? It's very interesting. The very first time I ever campaigned with Donald Trump was in January of 2016 when he was businessman Trump. We flew around Iowa one weekend. It was before any caucus, any vote had been cast. And as we were flying over Iowa, I said, Mr. Trump, I believe you're going to be the next president of the United States. And if that happens, it's because God has a great plan for your life. And I quoted that vote for the verse from Daniel 2 about God establishing and removing leaders. He said, do you really believe that? I said, yes, sir, I do. He thought for a moment. He said, well, let me ask you a question. Do you think it was God's will for Barack Obama to be elected president? And I said, yes, sir, I do. God establishes and removes all leaders for a divine purpose.
One other question, I suppose, would come from that. What about the poor guy who died defending his daughters? That assassin's bullet that was tipped away from Donald Trump's head was pushed directly then into the body of an innocent man who had daughters there who leapt forward to save them.
And by his own admission was a man, and by his own admission was a man who loved Jesus Christ and was a faithful servant of Christ.
That's even worse then, even worse. Someone who actually believes in this stuff then gets punished for standing behind Donald Trump, and divine intervention that protects Trump directly harms him. That's a tough pill for many people to swallow, that you can value one person's life over another.
And you know what is even a harder pill to swallow is that God would allow, even plan for his own son to be tortured and executed on a wooden cross. And yet that was his plan. God has a plan for all of us. We don't understand it, but for a Christian, to die is not a loss, it's a gain if you really believe what the Bible says. Yeah. And to answer your question, yes, this was part of God's plan for that man to die and for Donald Trump to live. If it wasn't God's plan, if God had nothing to do with it, then that's a terrifying thought that you and I are just subject to random circumstances and random people that makes you want to go ahead and just go out and end it all. If you believe
I find that thought completely reassuring. The fact that nothing is written, that random forces exist, that the world exists simply because of random forces. Evolution happens simply because of random forces. That to me,
find that comforting.
That is a hugely empowering notion, that the world is not yet controlled, that everything is still open. That feels very, very moving to me, actually.
Well, if you follow that logic, then you have to come to the conclusion that when we die, that's it, lights out, there's nothing ahead.
And that is exactly the conclusion I draw. I think that's exactly right. That there is a moment, there's a switch off moment, and then you're done. That's the nature of things.
Well, that's a pretty depressing thought. And the good thing,
realistic. Maybe I prefer realism to your nature. I mean, I realize faith is a story, and you believe that story, and I understand that. But
yeah, but I believe
a cold reality to a
story that's rooted in fact, not myth, and that's another program we can do sometime. About
I think that's probably yeah, that's fair. There's no time for a theological debate, though I would love to have one with you. Just finally, then, there is a concern. People listening to this will say, what you're doing here, Robert, is you are providing a moral shield to Donald Trump. You're effectively saying, here's this man who, by measurable methods, has behaved badly. And some people think he's a danger. Some people think he's a danger to democracy and how he conducted himself over January 6th. Some people look at the fact he's abused women, the things he's said about women, the things he's done in his life, and they think he is a bad person. And what you're doing, Robert, is you're creating a moral shield for Donald Trump.
No, I'm not excusing anything he may or may not have done any more than I'm excusing what I do. The Bible says we're all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. We all need God's forgiveness. And whether Donald Trump has received that forgiveness from God is between him and his creator. But it's a recognition that God has three institutions he founded. The Bible says he founded the family in Genesis 2, government in Genesis 9, and the church in Acts 2. God created government for a reason. That is to protect innocent people from evildoers, Romans 13 says. And the qualifications for somebody to serve in government are different than the qualification for serving in a church. And I don't think we're
But
providing
by virtue of that, Robert, that's not protecting people from evildoers, because he might be the evildoer.
Yeah, well, then he goes through the court system and we let the court system decide that.
They have decided, and you're still covering for him. That's what people are saying. The courts has looked at Donald Trump.
What am I doing to cover for him? I'm saying those are not disqualifiers from being president of the United States. Democrats in our country supported Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, all known adulterers who did horrible things to women. And yet they supported them. Why? Because they believed in the abuse of women? No, they supported them for their policies. What's okay for the left is okay for the right.
Robert, I absolutely find this fascinating. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.